100 feet in length. And I recall this because while you were in camp, since you had so much time, you tried to do something. And I became what you call a runner for the ward leader. And we had wards, and we were in A ward since we were the early ones, one of the early ones that went in. And I had to make some surveys of who were in the buildings, supposedly. I don't know if they used it or not, but that's what I had to do. And they were 20 by 20 buildings, rooms, and a family had one room. We had 7 in the family, and we were in one 20 by 20 room.
Size wasn't the only problem. With summer temperatures soaring to well over 100 degrees, conditions inside the tar paper barracks were virtually unbearable. Furniture was, at best, sparse. Howard Taniguchi remembers creating his own bed.
For me, it was awful. I wasn't used to sleeping on a straw mattress. We had to make our own mattress with stuffed straw when we first got into the camp. Yeah, I remember that. And food was all right. I didn't care for the bathroom. They had a terrible bathroom.
Most of the Japanese Americans living in the Merced area were temporarily interned at the Merced Assembly Center, but many came to Merced from outside of the area as well.
We were under 1,000, I'm pretty sure, that came from Livingston, Merced, Cortez. So the rest of them came from throughout the rest of California. They came from Walnut Grove, which is quite a ways, and they came from some from Stockton area, and they went all the way up to north central California. They came all the way from Colusa, which is in Colusa County up north, and Yuba City. So people came from all over, and there were a number that came from the areas around the Bay Area also.
Food was, I'd say, fair. For the condition we had, you couldn't complain too much because it was Japanese cook and they made it to our taste.
I don't recall the food in the assembly center that much. Most of the cooking was done there by the internees, the people that were in the camp. They became the cooks. And actually what happened in the camp was that the camp was really self-governed to the extent that we had block managers, and we had, and then they reported to the head of the center. And the head of the center were Caucasian people with the government, but the rest of us were all people within the camp itself. And we had some, highly educated people in camp because there were many, many college graduates even at that stage. So they did a good job of governing ourselves in the camp.
That summer passed so fast because of baseball. The crowd be in the stand, they watch us rooting,
For some of the children, the Merced Assembly Center was a lot like summer camp. In addition to baseball, there were other sports and crafts with less emphasis on school. But it was quite a different story for the adults. Former internee Tom Nakashima recounts what his parents endured.
The worst part of it is that, the folks, our parents, my mother must have been 45 or 46 at the time, and my dad was in his early 50s. And to be jerked out of your home, not knowing where you're going, or when you're going, to begin with, before it all started, not knowing when you're going, where you're going, or if you'll ever come back. And that is, absolutely terrifying, for a parent with 3 kids to know not what your future is.
All I can say was terrible. I was so depressed that I know the first week or so I just stayed in bed.
In my mother's later years, my mother lived to be 100. And in her later years, she would talk about some things, and she would just repeat the stories over and over again. And one of the stories she kept repeating was the story about me hanging on to her skirts, and I kept begging her and nagging her to go home. And that, the young man who brought us to camp, who kindly brought us to camp, would pick us up if we just went out to the road, and we could go home. And My mother never told me what her response was, and I assume she probably didn't have a response. I don't know what you tell the child.
While some of the detainees left early to help with the construction of the more permanent concentration camp, most left en masse by train, beginning in September of 1942. The destination was the Amachi relocation camp, located in an isolated area of southeastern Colorado near the Kansas border. Government films portrayed this as a pleasant train ride. For most of the passengers, though, it was terrifying.
The first thing they did was said that all the blinds had to be pulled so that we could not see out. And so that's how the journey started. And wherever we went, it seemed that we were sidetracked because any other train that went by got priority. And so it took us a long time to get there. I think it took us 3 days and 2 nights, I believe, to get to Colorado from here.
One of the stops, troop train stopped right next to us, full of Marines. We're looking at them and they're looking at us, and I wondered, all of a sudden someone in our train say, "Oh, where are you guys headed?" And that pandemonium, them guys said, "Hey, these prisoners can speak English." We thought that was so funny, but I guess they're from the east, never saw Orientals.
The train was very crowded, of course, all the seats were taken. And there were a lot of children too, and the children were crying a lot, and it was not a pleasant trip. It was hot because this happened in September, and there was no way to look out, basically. And they did let us out at one time in the Mojave Desert. They stopped the train and said that we can get out and get a breath of air.
But it was night, and we got off the train, and people were just kind of milling around. And quite frankly, in Japanese, they were saying, "I think this is the time they're going to shoot us." Okay? And all of a sudden, the searchlights went on, and by gosh, there were people with guns out there. And my grandmother, in those days, they wore those big full skirts, and she just wrapped me in there. I don't know whether she grabbed me by the neck or the head or the body, but she just dragged me back onto the train. And I don't know if they ever gave us an opportunity to get off the train or not, but I imagine no one got off.
Approximately 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans were incarcerated at 10 internment camps during World War II. Amachi was the smallest, with a population that peaked at just over 7,300. Internees from the Merced Assembly Center unloaded at the train depot in nearby Granada, Colorado. Sherman Kishi remembers what it was like being transported to an armed concentration camp.
And then we got on to mostly trucks, I believe, military trucks, and they hauled us into the camp. And the camp was probably about 2 miles away from the city of Grenada. So that's how we first got into the camp. And that camp, of course, was also had barbed wire around it with watchtowers on most of the corners. So it was a completely armed camp.
Like the assembly center, for some of the youngsters, it felt like a long vacation. There were lots of kids, sports, and clubs. And they didn't have to work in the family business.
For us, I didn't really feel that much because I didn't have to work on the field anymore. So they made a lot of new friends.
And I hate to say it was like a vacation, but it was something that we didn't have to work. We didn't have to buy our groceries. Of course, the thing about the food is a little difficult, but then they got used to our needs and they started cooking pretty good Japanese food because we had Japanese cooks in there.
But the food wasn't the real problem with dining. Marlene Tanioka explains how eating arrangements impacted the family unit.
But the interesting about the mess hall was that mothers ate with their children, and then the older kids started eating, with the older kids. Teenagers ate, in groups, and even fathers ate separately. And so there was a real breakup of the family.
I remember one of the Christmases. And we talk about it, me and my grandchildren, when they get their iPods and all of that stuff. I got a Snickers bar and an orange, you know, a Snickers bar and an orange.
Life in a camp for young kids wasn't so bad because they had other kids to play with. We lived out in the country, we're by ourselves. We're here in camp, we had kids to play with, so you know, we didn't feel it as hard as I'm sure the parents did that felt deprived of living in their own homes.
You could imagine a man and wife with kids, and he was in his early 50s, get stuck in a little room, no privacy, no walls. You know, you're supposed to try to live a normal life. And he used to say to me, they treat us like animals. And, you know, I didn't really quite get it at that time, but as I think about it now, he was right, you know. No privacy. Get stuck in a room, one potbelly stove in the corner and 4 or 5 beds. That's it. And
In 1944, the U.S. began drafting Japanese American men into mostly segregated divisions. The most famous of these was the 442. Emotions at Amachi were mixed. Dan Kubo's father was a Nisei, the second generation, and born in the U.S. He went to prison for resisting the draft.
What seemed to have really gotten his goat, so to speak, is that he had, eventually been classified 4C, enemy alien. You know, and this is, I think that the experience of almost all of the Nisei, you know, that they were considered enemy aliens. Okay, and then after that, to cut to the chase, he was given a notice to appear for physical, you know, for his physical, pre-induction physical. In other words, his status had changed to being draftable, and I think this is what really got him. It angered him because it was a change in his responsibilities to the country, but there was no change in his status as a citizen.
When the government decided that they were going to develop a all-Japanese unit, to myself, I thought that was discriminatory again, because it's going to be all Japanese.
And I talked to my father about that. And I told him that I was going to volunteer for the MIS after I became 18. And he said, I can remember him saying, well, this is your country. That's something that if you want to do it, you should do it.
Unfortunately, you know, some people get killed the first day and some people the last day. So I got wounded the next to the last day of the combat.
In their absence, many Japanese Americans lost everything. Hundreds of ranchers in the Merced area, however, entrusted their property to the care of one man. Wilma Arnold worked closely with Gus Momberg.
There were 3 groups, the Livingston Fruit Exchange, the Livingston Growers, and the Cortez Growers. And those 3 groups each had a trustee, and those 3 trustees in turn hired Mr. Gus Momberg to be their agent. And Mr. Momberg had charge of all the land that was involved from these 3 groups. As I remember, there was close to just short of 5,000 acres involved in all of this.
The older Niseis got together and decided to form this trusteeship, and the trusteeship was to hire a manager. And the manager was hired. He was a former Bank of America, I think, loan officer or something. But he took over the management of the trusteeship and leased out the land of all the people that were in the communities. So most of the land got leased out, almost all of it got leased out to individuals that wanted to run the ranches. And during the wartime years, of course, the prices got real good. And so these people did very well, and they were able to pay the mortgages, and so no one lost their land.
My dad was in the co-op in Livingston, so our little 20 acres was included in the package.